After the Cold War ended, sinister elements in the United States plotted to absorb all of Europe into the American empire after transforming NATO from a defensive alliance into a collection of vassal states. The United States began withdrawing from treaties that had limited its ability to deploy missile systems to Europe and ignored the United Nations Charter by launching aggressive wars on Serbia and Libya to topple their governments. In 2008, American President George Bush officially announced plans to add the nation of Ukraine to his empire, pictured in green. This would strike a serious blow to Russia by cutting its access to southern Europe. Ukraine was a key Russian trading partner that controlled most access to the Black Sea and most natural gas pipelines to Europe. It is the second largest nation in Europe by size, with significant oil, natural gas, and coal reserves. Professor Jeffery Sachs from Columbia University explained this plan.
When it comes to Russia, Zbig Brzezinski pretty much spelled this out in his very interesting book, The Global Chessboard, Grand Chessboard, A Global Chessboard, 1997, where he said that Ukraine is the geographical pivot of Eurasia. It's the key. If the United States is basically in charge, Russia ceases to be even a regional power, basically. It's cut out from the Black Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean. Ukraine's a big prize if you're a neocon. And a neocon is someone who views the world like the game of Risk, that you want to get all your pieces on the board and you want to take all of your opponent's pieces off the board. And Ukraine is really strategic from their point of view. And this is
in 2008, William Burns, who is now American President Joe Biden's director of the CIA, but was then ambassador to Russia, warned, quote, "Ukrainian entry into NATO is the brightest of all red lines for the Russian elite," end quote. WikiLeaks published this from a secret diplomatic cable, where he also warned Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice that, quote, "I have yet to find anyone who views Ukraine and NATO as anything other than a direct challenge to Russian interests," end quote. Burns called NATO expansion into Eastern Europe, quote, "premature at best and needlessly provocative at worst," end quote. If it came to Ukraine, Burns warned, quote, "there could be no doubt that Putin would fight back hard," end quote. NATO members knew this too, and several openly opposed the idea.
Hello and welcome to Top Story. The leaders of NATO begin a two-day summit today that looks set to highlight the pressures straining the fabric of the alliance. Among the most divisive issues, should NATO agree to give membership action plans to Georgia and Ukraine? Maps are seen as a final step along the path to joining the alliance and are as close to a guarantee of future membership as you can get. US President George W. Bush has pledged unequivocal support to both, saying in Ukraine on Tuesday that the two countries were ready and worthy of welcome into the alliance. Russia, though, has led a fierce campaign to persuade NATO against, warning that their acceptance would place enormous strain on its relationship with the alliance. That seems to have persuaded France and Germany to back off. French Prime Minister François Fillon said on Tuesday that France would not support starting the membership process because it would upset the balance of power between Europe and Russia.
The idea of absorbing Ukraine into NATO was complicated by the fact that most Ukrainians speak Russian as their primary language. A large minority are ethnic Russians, while a larger group are mixed Russian-Ukrainian, or lived in the Russian-majority areas of eastern Ukraine for generations. These regions belonged to Russia until 1922, when Soviet Premier Lenin sought to gain support for Soviet Union by giving its new Republic of Ukraine large parts of Russian territory. In 1954, Soviet Premier Khrushchev, a Ukrainian, transferred Crimea to Ukraine to strengthen this bond, even though 80% of its population was Russian. Since Soviet citizens were ruled from Moscow, this had little effect on Russians living in the Soviet Republic of Ukraine. When the Soviet Union suddenly disbanded, the issue of millions of Russians living outside the new Russian Federation was ignored, since Europe was at peace. Ukraine is considered Russia's sister nation, much like the relation between the United States and Canada. After allowing Ukraine to become a separate nation in 1991, Russia assisted Ukraine with discounted oil and natural gas. Most Ukrainians didn't want to join NATO, so in 2010, elected a president who opposed this effort. This map looks evenly divided, but eastern Ukraine in blue is far more densely populated. As a result, the U.S. government began a massive campaign to demonize Russia and destabilize the democratic government of Ukraine. A key tool used by the CIA to topple governments is called the National Endowment for Democracy, whose website proudly states that it has been involved in Ukrainian politics since 1989. It awarded millions of dollars in grants each year to hundreds of organizations in Ukraine to promote NATO. The U.S. State Department representative in Ukraine, Victoria Nuland, publicly bragged that $5 billion American dollars were devoted to this cause, sold as freedom to allow prosperity.
I don't have to tell this crowd that these are historic and challenging times for the people of Ukraine, for the Ukrainian-American relationship, and for people everywhere who care about the future of that great country. The world is watching the drama that is unfolding in the center of Kyiv. The Euromaidan movement has come to embody the principles and values that are the cornerstones for all free democracies. What began on November 24th as a protest against President Yanukovych's decision to pause on the route to Europe, we've invested over $5 billion to assist Ukraine in these and other goals that will ensure a secure and prosperous and democratic Ukraine. Today, there are senior officials in the Ukrainian government, in the business community, as well as in the opposition, civil society, and the religious community who believe in this democratic and European future for their country. And they've been working hard to move their country and their president in the right direction.
The U.S. Army was part of this effort. It had begun preparations for the annexation of Ukraine into the empire just 2 years after the Cold War ended, when troops from the California National Guard deployed to Ukraine. The United States spent $1 billion to expand and improve a huge Army training base in Ukraine and expand its army. Hundreds of American soldiers lived there to train the rapidly growing Ukrainian army. American combat units routinely deployed to Ukraine to train alongside the Ukrainian army. This was not widely reported by the American media, as citizens might object to this spending. The extent of this massive effort can be seen in the over 1,000 U.S. Army news articles about activities in Ukraine since 1993, linked below. It wasn't long before the U.S. Army deployed a Ukrainian vassal force to help police the American empire. Ukrainian soldiers were deployed to Iraq as the third largest coalition forces contingent, with more than 5,000 troops serving there. Ukraine was not an American ally and had no reason to send soldiers to help control Iraq, but U.S. Army generals had taken control of its army. Once President Obama entered office in 2008, he authorized a program to provide Ukraine with millions of dollars in weaponry, funded new military bases in Eastern Europe, and increased American troop levels in Europe. This was a blatant violation of the 1997 agreement between NATO and Russia not to build new military bases or deploy new military units, called the Founding Act.
US President Barack Obama in Poland to mark the 25th anniversary of the first partially free elections in the country has revealed he is to start what he called a European Reassurance Initiative. The move will boost US military presence in Europe. The announcement came in a joint press conference with the Polish President Bronisław Komorowski at the start of Obama's 4-day visit to Europe.
We'll increase the number of American personnel, Army and Air Force units, continuously rotating through allied countries in Central and Eastern Europe. And we will be stepping up our partnerships with friends like Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia as they provide for their own defense. I'm calling on Congress to approve up to $1 billion to support this effort, which will be a powerful demonstration of America's unshakable commitment to our NATO allies.
Earlier, on his arrival in Warsaw, the President had met US and Polish air personnel from a detachment of F-16 fighter jets. Obama also stressed that more sanctions were being prepared against Russia if the West decided Moscow engaged in activities which were destabilizing Ukraine.
Adding Ukraine to NATO was a top priority of the Obama administration. He appointed Vice President Joe Biden to lead the effort, who visited Ukraine over a dozen times. Millions of American taxpayer dollars sent to Ukraine were routed back to the United States in the form of campaign contributions, known as dark money, and via friends and family members of senior officials through direct payments or legal methods, like buying their personal artwork for large sums. In 2006, Ukraine's top prosecutor was investigating why Burisma Natural Gas had paid $3 million to Joe Biden's son, Hunter. The Bidens are pictured here with two Ukrainian businessmen. The vice president took decisive action.
And I went over for, I guess, the 12th, 13th time to Kyiv, and I was supposed to announce that there was another $1 billion loan guarantee. And I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko and from Yatsenyuk that they would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. So they said they were walking out to press conference. I said, no, I said, we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said. I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch. Got fired. And
the American empire had established firm control of the Ukrainian army while expanding and improving its capabilities. Corruption in Ukraine was exploited by corrupt senior American officials to enrich themselves. Millions of dollars were spent influencing elections in Ukraine, but the Americans were unable to overcome Ukraine's historic ties to Russia. The people of Ukraine had elected a president who refused to seek NATO or EU membership. A coup was required.